Hello YouTubers, and welcome to another episode of Malcontent Corner, the corner where I hope to enrich in your lives by sharing with you things I've learned in the daily walk of mine. In today's episode, we're going to talk about an issue that occurred with my Chrysler JXI convertible. Now, before I get into that, I'm just going to say I'm noticing a pattern here, and it is not due to any grand plan of mine, but it seems as though when I work on a car, I end up working on it 3 or 4 times. Obviously not for the same issues, but it seems as though once I work on a car, it's like, hey, you're focusing on me, I'm going to give you all of my problems. For example, my wife's Mercury Cougar, I end up fixing 3 or 4 problems on that. If you watched a few episodes ago, I did a video about the door checks on my Chrysler convertible. I took care of those about a year ago. My last video was about a map sensor that went bad. Since that time, I've done a timing belt replacement on that car. I have not filmed a video on that. The reason being is it's very tight quarters. It's very fiddly work, and it's actually the first timing belt I've ever done. However, I am happy to say that the car is running fine. Or it was running fine. Finished the job probably late March, so April, May, all the way through most of June, the car was running like a champ. However, one Friday, I drove it to work. Car ran fine, parked it in the garage, got out of work, went to drive home, fired up the car just fine. But I found that anytime I would give the car any amount of throttle, it would just not run. It was falling on its face and hiccuping and bucking, and it sounded like backfiring through the intake. Unfortunately, I had to get the car home. I had an appointment with a friend that night, so it's like, man, I got to get this car home and swap it out. I was able to get the car home, but a drive that would normally take about 25 minutes took the better part of an hour. On the way home, obviously the check engine light came on, and when I did have time to work on the car, I did the onboard diagnostics. On these Chrysler cars, you can run it without any special tools. You put the key in the ignition, you turn it from off to on, off, and then on the 5th time you leave it on, and the check engine light will start flashing in a sequence of flashes that will amount to a number, and you cross that number in a book or using some sort of a guide to what the problem is. In this case, the car was flashing 51, which corresponded to a P0171 error, which meant the rear bank was running lean. So at that point, I knew I had a fuel issue on this car. I did some preliminary checks. I made sure I didn't have any vacuum leaks, sprayed some carb cleaner around the plenum intake, make sure that the gasket didn't go bad or anything like that. Nothing readily was sticking out. However, at this point, I figured, okay, my collection of tools for working on fuel injection is kind of lacking. So I went to Harbor Freight and ended up picking up a basic fuel injection kit, which comes with a gauge such as this and a bunch of fittings that you can use to adapt to your car to check the pressure of the fuel pump. Once I did that, here is what I found. Okay folks, so what I did after doing preliminary checks, I hooked up a fuel pressure gauge. I don't know if you see that. That's running about 25 psi right now and dropping. And as you watch it drop, the car runs worse and worse. And here's the problem that I was describing. So when you give it throttle, it falls on its face. So yes, I have a bad fuel pump. Nope, now it's down to about 15. And yep, it's stabilized. But as you can see, it's running way low. So bad fuel pump. So as we see, the fuel pump was bad. And I replaced that fuel pump, and here's the results of that. Alright folks, here's the car after I got the new fuel pump in. And look at that. 50 psi, way better. In fact, that's factory spec. Factory spec is 49 psi plus or minus 2 pounds, and I am running 50. So, yay! Car's doing good. Let's goose her a little bit. Yep, sounds good. Not too concerned about that little stumble there. The engine's still cold, so. But yeah, she's doing good. All right, back to the garage. So there we have it. As I stated in the video there, it's a bad fuel pump. Now, you know, that the problem wasn't consistent. One time I fired up the car, it was pulling 45 psi, and it ran fine. But then I shut the engine off and fired it back up, and then the fuel pump would maybe pull 35 pounds, and then it would drop down to 20. And sometimes it would only provide 20 psi, and then it would drop down to maybe 15. And sometimes it would bounce between 20 and 30. I mean, it was bouncing all over the place. So that gauge saved me a lot of headache in trying to troubleshoot the problem. Now, I didn't film the replacement of the tank itself. It's pretty straightforward, but I will give you some pointers on what to do if you have to do a job like this. Now, first thing I'm going to warn you here is you are working with gasoline, and the gas itself isn't deadly, but the fumes can be, especially if they accumulate and something sparks. So if you're going to try to do anything fuel tank related, try to do it outside. That being said and done, if you can't and you have to do it in a garage, there's nothing wrong with that. Make sure you have every door open that you can. If you can, try to put a fan on the outside to try to blow some air through the garage to keep fumes from accumulating. And obviously try to remove any issues of spark. In other words, no smoking a cigarette or cigar in the garage. No doing anything silly like that. And it never hurts if you can to have either a bucket of water or, even better yet, a fire extinguisher nearby in case something bad should happen. Now, the fuel tank removal itself is pretty straightforward. However, it is a little, well, it can catch you off guard. And here's what I mean by that. The first thing you are going to want to do is remove the back seat from this car. And I know you're thinking, wait a minute, why would I do that? Well, the reason why is the electrical connection is behind the back of the back seat, the upright of the back seat, I should say. So you have to remove the bottom seat out of the car, and the bottom seat was hooked in a little bit different than I'm used to on my older cars. This actually has, the frame has a little metal U on there that slides down into a plastic receptacle. I ended up removing it by putting a big screwdriver in there, pushing back and lifting up on that screwdriver to get the back seat to pop up. Once I did that, I removed that. There are two 18mm bolts that hold in a metal bracket that hold on the seat belt receptacles. You pull that bracket out, and then the back of the back seat will lift up. You don't have to take it out, just lift it up enough so you can peel back the sound deadener and get to that electrical connection. Once you're done with that, everything else is done underneath the car, and it is pretty straightforward. Now, Murphy being Murphy, odds are when your gas pump goes bad, you're probably going to have anywhere from 3/4 to a full tank in this car. I had 3/4 of a tank, but fortunately they do provide a drain on the driver's side of these gas tanks. It's a nylon bolt, if you will. You can pull it out and it drain the gas into a receptacle. Obviously, if you have a full tank, you will probably be just having to try to find a home for anywhere from 10 to 12 gallons. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But in my case, I ended up using some spare gas cans that I had and filling those up so then I could at least, you know, get the tank into a lighter situation where I could try to handle it. That being said, there still will be a couple of gallons of gas left in this tank, and it is kind of bulky and awkward. So the next thing you want to do is slide a jack up underneath that tank, preferably with a 2x4 or a 2x6 on it to help support that tank. At that point, you can loosen up the worm gear for the filler tube that feeds into the neck of the tank. If it's stock, it will be a 6mm hex head. You can possibly get a straight blade standard screwdriver on it. In my case, at the angle it was, I could not do that. I had to use a socket. I loosened up the worm gear. I put the screwdriver between the filler tank of the tank itself and the rubber hose and kind of worked it around to break the seal there a little bit. At that point, you can then drop 4 13mm bolts from the tank straps and the tank will drop down. Now, you do not want to drop this tank on the ground. Reason being is, number one, you got to make sure that electrical connection is fed out through the body. But also, in addition to that, is that you will have the line that feeds the fuel line that feeds up to the front of the car. You need to disconnect that, as well as a vent tube of some sort. Maybe I don't know what the tube is for, but I'm just calling it a vent tube. There is no clamp on that. That is just a simple slide on. Just slide it loose. You can pull it apart. The fuel tank line itself is, they use these kind of funky clips on these Chryslers that look like this. You can see them underneath the hood of the car when you look at the fuel line, the rubber fuel line that connects to the metal fuel line. Basically, they have these white clips on here. You pinch them together and you can pull the black shell off, this being the rubber line itself. So, and then to hook them back up, you just snap them into place. It's really that easy. Once you have the fuel line disconnected and that vent line disconnected and you're sure your electrical cable is out from the body, you can then drop the tank down. Now, the tank will still be bulky, it will still be awkward. It will probably have a heat shield attached to it to protect the tank from the exhaust. That you can pop off pretty easily. That was just a press fit, at least in my car it was. It just slid onto a couple of tabs on the tank. But again, it's still going to be awkward and bulky, and it'll be sloshing gas around because it will still have about 2 gallons in there. Once you get it out, you will then need something along the lines of this. This is a retaining ring tool. This will help you remove the retaining ring and to install it as well, so that you can get the fuel pump out. Now, just so you know, the tank is bulky and awkward, and this fuel retaining ring has a 3/8 socket hole here, so you can put a ratchet in there. But I'm going to be honest with you, if you're going to want to try to use a ratchet on this, have another set of hands there to hold that tank. I was working alone that day, and it was hard for me to hold the tank and try to get the leverage I need to, and make sure the tools stayed on the ring without popping off. It ended up being a lot of work, and ultimately what I ended up doing was, there was a 3/8 to 1/2 inch socket adapter here. I ended up using an impact gun to pull the ring off. Now, it got the ring off just fine. I pulled the old assembly out. I replaced the fuel pump as an assembly. I did not mess around with individual pieces. Trying to buy the individual pieces, such as the sock, the pump, the pressure regulator, it drove the cost through the roof. You can get the whole assembly cheaper. That is the way I elected to go. Clean the tank, basically sprayed some carb cleaner in there, went in there with a paper towel just to wipe it down. It wasn't dirty anyways, but I just did that as a good practice. Dropped the new pump in, put a new O-ring on it. At that point, I then did use the ratchet to tighten up the ring. I was afraid hitting it with an impact gun would over-tighten it, possibly stripping the threads or breaking the ring or something like that. So I just tightened it as best I could so that it was nice and tight, and I thought it would work good enough, and it has. After that, I was able to slide the tank in. In sliding the tank in, you're going to want to go from the front of the car to the back. I forgot to mention that filler tube, once you pull the worm gear off of it, or the worm clamp, you're not going to be able to pull that rubber hose off. There's very limited space back there. So when you drop the tank, you're actually going to drop it down and move it forward, and it will pull it away from that filler tube. When it came to putting the tank back in, I just slid it from front to back, put the neck on, put it up into place, used the jack to hold it there, and then I was able to put everything back together, including the vent tube, including the fuel line fitting, the metal shield for the exhaust protection, and the force straps itself. And you saw the results of it. I'm now pulling a solid 50 psi. The car's running fantastic. So again, it's not a hard job, but it is fiddly, especially if you're a bigger guy. But you know, it's all said and done, I think, including the part and the pump itself, the part being this fuel retaining ring remover and installer, and the pump itself, I think I'm into the whole deal about $130. So it's really not it's not a hard job. From start to finish, it took me about 4.5 to 5 hours. That's probably a long time because you know, I had to figure out how to get the back seat out. That was a little bit of a chore. And also, draining the gas out of this thing took forever. Yes, I did have the gas cap loose, but it was just a slow process because I'd have to wait till the receptacle was full, then, you know, put the nylon bolt back in to stop it from dripping or leaking, and then pouring the gas into, you know, gas can, and then going back. I mean, that took probably for me the better part of an hour right there. So it's not a hard job, but it was fiddly. So anyways, that's what I have for you here in this episode of Malcontent Corner. I hope you appreciate it. I hope that you find some use to it. I'm knocking on wood here. I'm hoping this is the last video I have to make on this car for a while. But with the timing belt and all that, I think she's in good shape for a while. So as always, I appreciate you listening to me talk and take your time out of your day to watch my videos. If you like this video, please subscribe. Feel free to leave a note down below. Let me know what you think. But until that time when we meet again, please take care of yourselves, and we'll see you back again here at a later date. Okay? Ciao.